Imagine, for just a second, staring straight down the barrel of a loaded gun.
Sounds terrifying.
Right. And the guy holding that gun is a furious, sweating county sheriff who has just trapped you across the country to a hotel room in Chicago.
Because he knows you robbed him.
Exactly. He knows you robbed him of $10,000, so his finger is resting on the trigger, his face is red, and he is just screaming that he's going to kill you.
I mean, that is a literal nightmare scenario.
It is. So what is your very next move? Do you, beg for your life? Do you drop to your knees or maybe try to run for the door?
Most people would definitely just freeze or start pleading.
Sure, yeah. But what if I told you that the smartest, most psychologically devastating strategy in that tiny fraction of a second is to look that furious sheriff dead in the eye, furrow your brow, and tell him he's holding the gun wrong?
It sounds counterintuitive to the point of absolute madness.
Completely insane, right?
Yeah, because our natural instinct when confronted with extreme aggression is to either submit entirely or to, match the aggression with defensive pleading.
Right, fight or flight.
Exactly. But stepping into the chaotic machinery of the other person's mind and completely overloading their cognitive bandwidth with an argument they just aren't expecting.
It's a masterstroke, honestly. A masterstroke of survival.
It really is.
So, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. You, the learner, are about to embark on a pretty wild psychological journey into the absolute limits of human logic and the profound, often hidden danger of words themselves.
I'm very excited for this one. I'm your resident expert on human behavior and power dynamics, and we have a lot to unpack.
And I'm your host. Our mission today is to basically tear down the illusion of rational debate. We are unpacking a very specific, utterly ruthless principle derived from a massive stack of historical texts and behavioral psychology analyses.
We're looking at the ninth law of power.
Yes, which is win through your actions, never through argument.
It's such a tough pill to swallow because, well, we all walk around carrying this fundamental, comforting assumption.
Which is what exactly?
We believe we are rational creatures. We assume that words are simply neutral vehicles for truth, right?
Oh, like if I just explain it clearly enough, you'll agree with me.
Exactly. We think that if we just stack our data high enough, the other person will eventually concede. We think conflict resolution is just a math equation.
But it's really not.
Not at all. When you look at the historical record and when you examine the neurology of persuasion, that assumption is exposed as a fatal flaw.
Because words are cheap?
Incredibly cheap. They are highly subjective, totally untethered from reality, and inherently slippery.
I mean, think about it. Think about the last time you actually changed someone's deeply entrenched belief by arguing with them.
It doesn't happen.
It really doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about a real core conviction. You probably can't even remember a time that happened.
Like a heated debate at a Thanksgiving table.
Yes. When was the last time that ended with someone saying, you know what, Uncle Bob, your logic is flawless. I completely abandoned my worldview.
Yeah, that has literally never happened in the history of Thanksgiving.
Exactly. It just doesn't happen. So today, we're going to explore how history's most brilliant minds bypass the ego trap of arguing entirely.
Because they understood that the moment you start debating, you have already lost.
Right. Instead, they used visceral, undeniable action to get exactly what they wanted, often without saying a single word.
And to see how devastating the failure to understand this can be, we need to travel back to the year 131 BC.
Oh, the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
The stakes were a bit higher back then.
Just a bit. The ancient world is the perfect laboratory for this concept because the stakes were stripped of all modern HR protections.
Right. No firing, just executions.
Exactly. The consequences of interpersonal failure were often absolute and fatal.
So we're looking at the Roman consul, Publius Crassus Dives Mucianus. He is a man of immense power, and right now he is currently engaged in laying siege to the Greek town of Pergamus.
Which is not a fun place to be.
Not at all. I want to set the reality of a Roman siege for you. This is not some polite standoff. This is an agonizing, filthy, high-stress environment.
Disease is rampant in the camps. Resources are dwindling.
Yeah, and the walls of the city are holding strong.
Yeah.
Mucianus desperately needs a breakthrough, which means he needs a larger, more devastating battering ram.
He needs to smash those walls.
Right, and he remembers that a few days prior, his troops had secured a shipyard in Athens.
Okay.
And sitting in that shipyard were two massive ship's masts. So he drafts a clear, unequivocal military order. Send the larger of the two masts immediately.
It is a directive from the absolute pinnacle of the military hierarchy.
Exactly.
In the Roman legions, the commander's word is not a polite request. It is the physical manifestation of the empire's will.
So the soldiers ride hard to Athens, they find the shipyard, and they hand the order to the military engineer in charge of the facility.
Now, this engineer is not just some random grunt, right?
No, the historical text is very clear that he is a master of his craft. He has spent his entire life studying structural integrity, the physics of wood under stress, and the mechanics of siege weaponry.
He knows his stuff.
He does. He looks at the order, he looks at the blueprints for the specific siege engine Mucianus is trying to build, and he immediately spots a massive problem.
Uh-oh.
The consul is asking for the larger mast, but the engineer knows the larger mast will be too heavy, too unwieldy, and will actually deliver less kinetic force.
Because it can't be swung fast enough.
Exactly. The smaller mast is mathematically, scientifically, and practically the superior choice.
And here is where the psychological trap springs completely shut.
Oh, yeah.
The engineer has the data. He possesses the objective truth of the situation.
Right. He's literally correct.
He is, but he completely fails to understand the social and political reality of the environment he occupies.
So true. The engineer starts arguing with the soldiers. He refuses to hand over the larger mast.
Oh, man.
He rolls out his blueprints. He starts drawing diagrams in the dirt. He's explaining the physics of kinetic transfer to a group of battle-hardened cavalrymen who just want to fulfill their orders and get back to camp alive.
They don't care about physics.
They don't. The soldiers even try to warn him. They literally tell him, our master is not a man to argue with.
Those soldiers understand something the engineer does not. They understand that power does not care about kinetic transfer.
Power cares about obedience.
Exactly. But the engineer is suffering from what psychologists call an illusion of asymmetric insight.
What's that?
He believes that because he understands the physics better, he also understands the broader social situation better.
Yeah.
He elevates his technical authority over the soldiers' lived experience of their commander's wrath.
He pulls intellectual rank on them.
Yes, which is a huge mistake.
So the soldiers eventually give up, trying to persuade him and tell him to just do whatever he's going to do. They leave.
They wash their hands of it.
Totally. The engineer is alone in his shipyard, and he asks himself a question that seals his doom. He thinks, what is the point in obeying an order that would lead to failure?
It sounds so incredibly reasonable on paper.
It does. So he loads the smaller mast onto the wagons and sends it to the front lines. He is completely, entirely confident that once the consul sees how much faster and more destructive the smaller ram is, the consul will see the underlying logic and reward him.
Reward him for his brilliant initiative.
Exactly.
It is a staggering level of naivete, but honestly, it is a naivete we see replicated in corporate offices every single day.
Right. So the smaller mast arrives at the siege camp. Mucianus walks out of his tent, sees the smaller piece of timber, and just asks his men what happened.
And the soldiers are probably terrified.
Oh, they are terrified of being crucified for failing their mission. So they immediately point the finger at the engineer.
Smart move on their part.
Yeah, they explain how he argued, how he drew diagrams, and how he knowingly defied the order. The Roman consul goes into a state of absolute blinding rage.
I can imagine.
He stops directing the siege entirely. He orders a detachment of troops to ride back to Athens, arrest the engineer, and drag him to the front lines.
And when the engineer is finally dragged into the commander's tent, we see the ultimate pathology of the arguer.
Yeah, you'd think he'd realize the danger.
Does he fall to his knees? Does he beg for his life?
No. He gladly explains his reasoning all over again.
He doubles down.
He launches into the exact same lecture he gave the soldiers. He quotes architectural principles. He tells the Roman consul, the man with the power of life and death over tens of thousands of men, that it is wise to listen to experts and that he should be grateful for the intervention.
He is standing in front of an active volcano and trying to cool it down by explaining the chemical composition of lava.
That is the perfect way to put it. So Mucianus listens in silence. He actually lets the engineer finish his entire presentation.
That silence must have been terrifying.
And then the consul orders the man to be stripped entirely naked in front of the entire legion, and he has him flogged and scourged with rods until he bleeds to death in the dirt.
A profoundly brutal end to a man who really thought he was just being helpful.
It is. And I have to pause the narrative here and play devil's advocate because I find this story deeply unsettling.
How so?
Well, it feels like a historical version of the frustrated IT expert who corrects the CEO on a company-wide video call.
Oh, yeah. We've all seen that happen.
Right. The IT guy have all the data. He knows the software integration plan is going to crash the servers, but because he corrects the boss in public, he gets fired. But isn't science supposed to be neutral?
You would think so.
Shouldn't a leader, especially a military leader whose own life and legacy depend on breaching those walls, want the absolute best outcome, even if it means swallowing his pride and being corrected by an underling? Why is the reaction so violently disproportionate?
That tension you are feeling is the exact friction between ideal world theory and real-world power dynamics.
Okay, break that down for me.
In a purely rational universe, yes, the commander would thank the engineer. But we do not live in a purely rational universe. We live in a universe governed by a human ego.
Right.
The source material refers to this engineer as the quintessence of the arguer. The arguer fundamentally misunderstands human nature because they believe that words and facts exist in a vacuum.
But they don't.
They absolutely do not. Words are never neutral. When the engineer argued with the soldiers, and later with the consul, he wasn't just offering an alternative physics equation.
He was basically insulting him.
He was implicitly impugning the intelligence of his supreme commander.
He was essentially saying, you, the great Roman conqueror, are too stupid to understand how wood works, and my dirt drawings prove it.
Precisely. And he did it in front of the entire military hierarchy. Mucianus was managing a high-stress siege. His authority was the only thing keeping thousands of armed men from deserting or mutinying.
So he couldn't afford to look weak.
If he allowed an engineer from a conquered territory to publicly defy his explicit orders and dictate strategy, the psychological architecture of his command would collapse.
So it wasn't about the mast at all.
Mucianus didn't care about the physics of the battering ram. When you argue with someone, especially someone whose ego is inextricably tied to their position or title, your reasoning falls on dead ears.
That makes a lot of sense.
The source text states this perfectly. Once he has made the other person feel insecure and inferior in his beliefs, the eloquence of Socrates could not save the situation.
Oh.
When you corner someone's ego with facts, they experience cognitive dissonance. Their brain interprets the contradictory information not as helpful data, but as a literal biological threat.
Like a physical attack.
Yes,
Yeah.
They dig in deeper to protect their identity. For the consul, executing the engineer wasn't about the mast anymore. It was about restoring the psychological order of his universe and reestablishing his absolute dominance.
The tragedy of the arguer is that he thought he was having a debate about engineering, but he was actually locked in a life-or-death struggle over status. The facts were totally irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant.
But if arguing with power gets you literally scourged to death, what happens when power has already turned against you?
That is a real challenge.
Like, what do you do when the commander or the boss or the client has already decided you are guilty and the facts don't matter?
This is where we cross the threshold from the failure of words to the absolute vital necessity of visceral proof.
Visceral.
Yeah. When the channel of communication is corrupted, you must speak a language that the ego cannot filter out.
And this brings us to a masterclass in survival. The story of the Sultan's vizier.
Oh, this is a brilliant one.
The vizier in this historical account had served his master for 30 years. He was the epitome of loyalty, truthfulness, and devotion. But the royal court is a venomous ecosystem.
It always is.
Honest men inevitably breed resentment among the corrupts. So a faction of enemies within the court decides to destroy him, and they use the exact weapon we are critiquing today: words.
They start a whispering campaign.
Exactly. Day in and day out, they drip poison into the Sultan's ear. They invent stories of the vizier's duplicity, his secret alliances, his perfidy.
It is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. If you repeat a lie often enough and from enough different sources, the human brain begins to categorize it as truth simply because of the fluency of the information.
Sheer repetition.
Right. The Sultan's perception of reality was being slowly rewritten by mere air.
And the poison does its work. The Sultan, whose paranoia is naturally high due to his position anyway, comes to deeply distrust his innocent vizier.
It's inevitable.
Finally, the paranoia peaks, and he orders the man to be put to death. Now, the execution method in this specific realm is not a swift beheading.
No, it's much worse.
It is designed to be terrifying and highly symbolic.
Yeah.
The condemned are tied up, stripped, and thrown into a deep stone pen where the Sultan keeps his fiercest, half-starved hunting dogs.
This is brutal.
The dogs tear the victim to shreds, while the court watches from above.
The leader's beasts consuming the traitor. It is a deeply visceral display of absolute power.
So, the vizier is condemned. The guards seize him. But before he is dragged to the pens, he makes one final petition to the Sultan. And I want you to notice what he does not do.
He doesn't argue.
He doesn't beg for his life. He doesn't ask for a trial. He doesn't scream about his 30 years of loyal service. Instead, he just asks for a 10-day respite.
A 10-day delay.
He says, "My lord, I accept my fate. I ask only for 10 days to pay my earthly debts, collect money owed to me, return items people put in my care, and appoint a guardian for my children."
It is a brilliant psychological maneuver.
Why does it work?
He is asking for the time to put his affairs in order, which is a deeply honorable request in that culture. By accepting his fate verbally, he dramatically lowers the Sultan's defensive posture.
Ah, he stops fighting the decree.
Exactly. The Sultan grants the request, assuming the man is utterly defeated.
But the vizier does not go home to weep. He hurries to his estate, collects 100 gold pieces, and secretly visits the royal huntsman who manages the execution dogs.
The guy in charge of the kennels.
Right. The vizier hands over the heavy purse of gold and says, "Let me take over your duties for the next 10 days. Let me look after the dogs."
And the huntsman just agrees.
The huntsman, newly rich, happily agrees. For the next 10 days, this high-ranking aristocratic vizier is down in the muck. He's shoveling waste, carrying heavy buckets of water, and feeding these terrifying beasts the finest cuts of meat.
He is getting his hands dirty.
He speaks to them softly, he grooms them. By the end of the 10 days, these ferocious man-eating dogs are eating right out of his hand.
He's entirely rewiring his relationship to the instruments of his destruction through pure action.
Then comes the climax. Day 11. The entire court is assembled. The enemies are smirking. The Sultan sits on his throne overlooking the pit.
Setting the stage for a public execution.
The fake charges are read aloud for the official record. The vizier is bound tightly with ropes and violently shoved over the edge into the pen. The dogs hear the thud. They turn, bare their teeth, and charge at him with lethal intent.
Imagine the absolute silence in that courtyard. The anticipation of violence.
But right as they reach him, the dogs stop. They sniff him. They recognize his scent. The snarling turns into whining.
Wow.
They run up to him, wagging their tails enthusiastically. They start affectionately nibbling at his shoulders. They roll over in the dirt at his feet, playfully demanding to be pet.
The visual disconnect for the onlookers would be completely staggering.
Totally. The Sultan leaps to his feet, absolutely stunned. He demands to know what kind of dark magic has caused these vicious animals to spare the traitor's life.
And this is the moment.
This is the moment the vizier delivers the knockout blow. He looks up at the Sultan, surrounded by the wagging dogs, and says, "I have looked after these dogs for 10 days. The Sultan has seen the result for himself."
Chills.
Right. He continues, "I have looked after you for 30 years, and what is the result? I am condemned to death on the strength of baseless accusations brought by my enemies."
That is the sound of a psychological trap snapping shut.
A total mic drop. The text notes that the Sultan immediately blushed with profound shame. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. He ordered the vizier to be pulled from the pit immediately.
He had to. The proof was right there.
He not only pardoned him, but he bestowed fine new clothes upon him and handed the slanderous enemies over to the vizier for execution.
And the vizier, demonstrating his superior character, simply set his enemies free.
Which is amazing. But why did this work? I keep putting myself in the vizier's shoes. 30 years of my life dedicated to a company or a cause or a leader, and I'm fired based on a lie.
It's infuriating.
My first instinct would be to gather every email, every ledger, every character witness I could find, and present a massive binder of proof to the boss to argue my innocence. Why wouldn't the vizier just do that?
Because the vizier understood the mechanics of confirmation bias, which is something the Roman engineer failed to grasp.
Okay, unpack that.
Once the Sultan believed the whispering campaign, his brain was no longer acting as an impartial judge. It was acting as a defense attorney for the new belief.
So he only wanted to see evidence that proved he was right.
Exactly. If the vizier had spent those 10 days writing a beautiful defense or presenting a logical counterargument to the slander, the Sultan would have viewed that binder of proof through a lens of extreme suspicion.
He would have just thought it was all fake.
He would have thought, look how meticulously he has forged these documents. Look how smoothly he lies. When someone is convinced you are their enemy, your words no longer sound like information. They sound like weapons.
The channel of verbal communication was completely corrupted.
Anything he said would just be used as evidence of his cunning.
That is terrifying, but it makes perfect sense.
The vizier needed a demonstration so undeniably powerful that it completely bypassed the Sultan's logic center, short-circuited the confirmation bias, and went straight to his emotional core.
He needed to induce visceral shame.
Yes. Think about the specific imagery he used. These dogs are beasts. They are driven entirely by base instinct and hunger. They have no capacity for logic.
They just know who feeds them.
Right. If even these wild, unthinking animals can recognize care, loyalty, and devotion after a mere 10 days, what does it say about the Sultan?
Ouch.
It forces the Sultan to realize that he, a supposedly enlightened and divine ruler, possesses less moral clarity than a pack of wild dogs because he couldn't recognize 30 years of absolute devotion.
He weaponized the dogs as a mirror to reflect the Sultan's own cruelty back at him.
And he did it without making a single argument until the demonstration had already fundamentally altered reality. The visual of the dogs wagging their tails did 99% of the persuasive work.
The words at the end were just the icing on the cake.
Exactly. The few words he spoke at the end were just the final turn of the key to unlock the shame. Action and demonstration occur right there, before our eyes. There is no possibility of misinterpretation.
Because it's happening in real time.
No one can argue with the demonstrated proof because it is a physical reality, not a theoretical proposition.
That distinction between physical reality and theoretical proposition brings up an interesting dilemma. Thankfully, most of us aren't facing the executioner's hunting dogs, and we aren't arguing with Roman commanders.
Thank goodness.
The stakes are rarely life and death, but what if you are dealing with a scenario where your professional reputation is on the line? What if you're dealing with an incredibly stubborn boss or an arrogant client who thinks they know your job better than you do?
That is a very common scenario.
How do you prove them wrong without them ever realizing they were proven wrong?
This is a highly nuanced arena. This is the realm of the subtle illusion. This is how you preserve the fragile ego of the person holding the purse strings while simultaneously maintaining the total integrity of your own work.
Okay, let's travel to Florence, Italy. The year is 1502. Inside the dusty, echoing works department of the Church of Santa Maria del Fiore, there rests a massive 18-foot block of raw marble.
A very famous block of marble.
But this isn't a pristine canvas. It is considered completely ruined. A previous unskillful sculptor named Agostino di Duccio had tried to rough out a shape years earlier, and he had mistakenly bored a giant hole right through the center, right where the figure's leg should have been.
Oh, that's bad.
He essentially mutilated the stone and abandoned it.
It was a famous eyesore. The city's mayor at the time, Piero Soderini, had tried to consult with various artists, including Leonardo da Vinci, to see if it could be salvaged.
And what do they say?
The consensus was uniform. It was a total disaster. The structural integrity was compromised. It was just gathering dust in the courtyard.
Until a group of influential friends write to a young sculptor living in Rome named Michelangelo. They tell him about this magnificent, albeit damaged, raw material.
And he takes the bait.
He does. Michelangelo travels back to Florence, stands in front of this ruined block, and studies the mutilation. He realizes that if he completely abandons traditional poses and adapts the stance of the figure to accommodate the massive hole, he can actually carve a fine figure from it.
He decides he will carve a young David, sling in hand, tense, and ready for battle.
Now, Mayor Soderini initially balks at this. He has already publicly declared the stone worthless, and funding a massive project on ruined material seems foolish.
Plus, it's a huge risk for the city's funds.
But Michelangelo persists, and Soderini, recognizing the young man's growing fame, finally agrees to let him build an enclosure and begin work.
Fast forward a few years, Michelangelo has worked obsessively behind closed doors. He is putting the final, delicate touches on the giant statue.
And the mayor comes to visit.
Yes. Mayor Soderini decides to pay a visit to the studio. Now, it's vital to understand Soderini's psychology here. He is a politician, but he fancies himself quite the art connoisseur.
Oh, the worst kind of client.
The absolute worst. He needs to assert his dominance over the project. He walks in, stares up at this towering, objectively magnificent work of genius, and he decides he must offer a critique to justify his presence.
Just to prove he's the boss.
Exactly. He looks at Michelangelo and says, "It is magnificent, but the nose is entirely too big. It ruins the symmetry."
It is the eternal curse of the creative professional. The client is presented with a masterpiece, but feels compelled to point out one entirely subjective, minute flaw just to prove they are part of the creative process.
So true.
And here is where Michelangelo proves he's a genius not just in stone, but in human psychology. If Michelangelo acts like the Roman engineer, what does he do?
He argues.
He sighs loudly. He pulls out a textbook on anatomical proportions. He explains to the mayor that the statue is meant to be viewed from far below in a public square, and that optical foreshortening requires the upper features to be slightly exaggerated.
He'd probably point out that the mayor is standing directly underneath it and his perspective is entirely skewed.
But if he does that, he impugns the mayor's artistic judgment. He makes the man feel foolish in front of the apprentices. He triggers the ego defense. So Michelangelo doesn't say a word about anatomy. Instead, he nods gravely, as if taking the critique incredibly seriously. He gestures for Soderini to follow him up the rickety wooden scaffolding.
I love this part.
As they climb higher and higher into the rafters, Michelangelo secretly reaches down and scoops up a handful of marble dust and small chips that are littering the wooden planks. He palms the dust.
Sleight of hand.
He reaches the level of the giant face, with Soderini standing just a few feet below him on the ladder. Michelangelo picks up his chisel, raises his mallet, and starts to tap lightly against the stone. Tap, tap, tap.
And then the magic happens.
And as he taps, he subtly opens his hand and lets the marble dust he gathered fall, little by little, drifting down through the air right past the mayor's face.
It is theatrical perfection. He is literally throwing dust in the man's eyes.
He spends several minutes doing this pantomime. He does absolutely nothing to alter the physical shape of the nose. Not a single millimeter of stone is removed. After a few minutes of this charade, he wipes his brow, steps aside, and looks down at the mayor. "Look at it now," he says.
And what does Soderini say?
Soderini, viewing the face from this new, higher elevation and believing his commands have been followed, smiles and says, "I like it much better. You have made it come alive."
Michelangelo understood a fundamental truth about power. By actually changing the shape of the nose to appease the mayor, he would have ruined the optical illusion of the sculpture, destroying his masterpiece.
Right.
But offending Soderini by arguing the geometry of foreshortening would not only risk this specific commission, it would jeopardize Michelangelo's entire future in Florence. Soderini controlled the city's patronage.
Michelangelo was far too clever to argue. He changed Soderini's perspective, literally physically moving him up the scaffolding to change his angle of sight, without ever making the mayor realize that his original perspective was the problem. He gave the mayor the victory.
It is a profound lesson in energy conservation. Argument requires massive amounts of intellectual and emotional energy and usually yields resentment. Illusion requires very little energy and yields satisfaction.
I want to pair this immediately with another story of architectural illusion, because it shows how universal this tactic is. We're moving from 1502 Florence to 1688 England, featuring Sir Christopher Wren.
Wren was the definition of an English Renaissance man. He was a master of mathematics, astronomy, physics, and architecture.
He's the man who rebuilt London after the Great Fire, right?
That's him.
Wren is commissioned to design a magnificent town hall for the city of Westminster. It's a grand, multi-story building. But as the construction nears completion, the mayor of Westminster develops a deep, irrational anxiety.
What is he afraid of?
His personal office is going to be located on the first floor, right beneath the massive, sprawling expanse of the second floor. The mayor is terrified. He summons Wren and tells him he's afraid the ceiling is going to come crashing down on his head while he works.
Oh, claustrophobia.
He demands that Wren construct two massive, extra stone columns right in the middle of his office to provide extra support for the ceiling.
Now, put yourself in Wren's position. He is the preeminent engineer of his age. He has calculated the load-bearing requirements down to the ounce.
Right. He knows the building is safe.
He knows absolutely that these columns will serve zero structural purpose and that the mayor's fears are totally baseless. The ceiling is perfectly safe.
A lesser man would have argued. A lesser man would have brought out the mathematical proofs, the stress tests, the architectural precedents, but Wren just nods.
He just goes with it.
He orders his workmen to haul massive blocks of stone into the mayor's office, and he builds the two massive columns right where the mayor requested. The mayor is ecstatic. He feels safe. He can conduct his business in peace, secure in the knowledge that his ceiling is supported.
But there's a catch.
There is a huge catch. It was only years later, long after the mayor was gone, when workmen erected a high scaffold to paint the ceiling, that they noticed something incredible. The two massive stone columns didn't actually touch the ceiling.
That is hilarious.
Wren had intentionally left a tiny, imperceptible gap at the top. They stopped just short. They were dummy columns.
They were holding up absolutely nothing but the mayor's psychological comfort.
I love these stories, but I have to push back here. When I look at Michelangelo faking chisel strikes and Wren building fake columns, it feels inherently manipulative.
I can see why you'd say that.
Aren't these guys just being incredibly patronizing to their bosses? Isn't there something deceitful about letting someone believe a lie just to shut them up?
It is a completely fair moral question, but if we analyze this through the lens of power and objective-oriented action, we have to reframe what the actual goal of these interactions is. It's not about condescension, it's about preserving the ultimate objective while minimizing friction. What was Michelangelo's objective? To save a masterpiece from being ruined by bad feedback and to secure future funding. He achieved both.
True.
What was Wren's objective? To keep his perfectly engineered design intact for posterity while allowing a nervous man to feel secure in his own building.
Both men got exactly what they wanted, and neither of their bosses felt insulted.
Exactly. The opponents in these stories, Soderini and the Westminster mayor, didn't get defensive because they felt deeply heard and accommodated. Their anxieties were addressed through tangible action.
If Wren had argued the physics of load-bearing walls, the mayor would have just felt stupid.
And his claustrophobic anxiety wouldn't have dissipated. He would have just resented Wren's arrogance. Instead, Wren gave him the physical manifestation of safety. It's a placebo for architecture.
A placebo column. I love that.
As the 17th century Spanish philosopher Baltasar Gracian remarked in his Aphorisms on Power, the truth is generally seen, rarely heard. Argument forces people to entrench themselves. Demonstration, even an illusory one, makes them physically feel your meaning.
Because it bypasses the ego.
Yes, it opens them up to persuasion because you have completely removed their ego from the equation.
The dummy columns are the perfect metaphor for navigating difficult people. You build the structure the other person's ego needs so you can preserve the reality you know is true.
And that realization leads us to an even deeper, much darker layer of this law. Physical demonstrations, like the marble dust or the dogs, are incredibly powerful. But the absolute pinnacle of winning without argument goes beyond physical action entirely.
Where does it go?
It ascends into the realm of pure symbolism.
Okay, this is where we look at how to manipulate the emotional environment of a room. Because when you use a symbol, you bypass the friction of debate entirely and tap straight into the collective unconscious. We are moving to the mid-20th century. The Soviet Union. 1956. Nikita Khrushchev is standing at the podium before the 20th Century Congress of the Communist Party. He is giving a highly charged, incredibly dangerous secret speech.
A huge moment in history.
He is officially denouncing the purges, the murders, and the absolute tyranny of Joseph Stalin.
This cannot be overstated. This is a seismic, paradigm-shifting event in Soviet politics. For decades, Stalin was treated as a living god. To criticize him, even after his death, was to invite chaos and potentially your own assassination.
The tension in the auditorium is suffocating. Right in the middle of Khrushchev's impassioned denunciation, a voice rings out from the back of the massive hall. A heckler yells, "You were a colleague of Stalin's. If he was doing all these terrible things, why didn't you stop him then?"
It is the ultimate political trap. It is a lethal question.
There's no good answer.
None. If Khrushchev defends his record and says he didn't know, he sounds incompetent. If he admits he was too weak to stop it, he looks like a coward. If he attacks the heckler, he looks like an authoritarian bully, which undermines his entire anti-Stalin speech.
So what does Khrushchev do? He doesn't launch into a geopolitical argument about the political climate of the 1930s. He doesn't make excuses about his rank at the time. He simply grips the podium, glares out into the sea of faces, and barks in a terrifying voice. Who said that?
Consider the visceral reality of that moment.
It is sheer, unadulterated terror. No hand goes up, no one breathes. Thousands of powerful men freeze in place. The room goes completely, deathly silent.
You could hear a pin drop.
Khrushchev doesn't immediately move on. He lets that tense, suffocating, agonizing silence hang in the air for several excruciating seconds. He sweeps his eyes over the crowd. And then he leans close into the microphone and says in a quiet, chilling voice, "Now you know why I didn't stop him."
It is a breathtaking maneuver of psychological judo.
He didn't just explain the fear. He manufactured a micro-environment of Stalinist paranoia in that very room.
Let's unpack the emotional weight of what just occurred. Khrushchev could have argued until he was blue in the face that opposing Stalin meant certain death.
He could have quoted execution statistics.
He could have reasoned with the crowd about the mechanics of a totalitarian state. But as we discussed earlier, that would just be bags of air. It is theoretical. It wouldn't have translated the visceral reality of the fear.
Argument is just a theoretical proposition.
Exactly. Instead, he made the audience feel the exact terror of confronting a supreme leader by suddenly snapping, "Who said that?" Khrushchev instantly adopted the persona of the authoritarian threat.
He became Stalin for a second.
He did. He made the audience feel the sudden drop in room temperature, the paranoia, the absolute fear of speaking up, the physical terror of being singled out for a firing squad. He put every single person in that room in his shoes for 10 agonizing seconds.
No further argument was necessary, because they had just literally experienced his defense.
The demonstration was entirely sensory. And speaking of sensory, unspoken threats, let's bring up another master of this tactic, Henry Kissinger.
Ah, yes. A very tense period in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The year is 1975.
Extremely tense.
Kissinger is engaged in incredibly frustrating, grinding negotiations with the Israelis over the return of part of the Sinai Desert, which Israel had seized during the 1967 Six-Day War. The negotiations are going absolutely nowhere. It's just endless circular arguments at the table.
It's exhausting.
Proposals are made, rejected, countered, and rejected again. Kissinger realizes words are failing, so he abruptly stops the meeting. He pushes his chair back and says, "We're going sightseeing."
A highly unorthodox diplomatic move during a crisis.
Very. He takes the entire Israeli delegation, boards helicopters, and flies them to the ruins of the ancient fortress of Masada. Now, if you know the history, Masada is not just a ruin. It is legendary.
It is a very sacred site.
It is a steep mountaintop fortress where, in AD 73, 700 Jewish warriors and their families held out against a massive Roman legion. When the walls were finally breached, rather than give in and surrender to the Romans to be enslaved, the entire population of the fortress committed mass suicide.
It is a site of immense, heavy historical trauma, defiance, and national pride. The sheer weight of collective memory at that site is staggering.
So Kissinger just stands there on the mountaintop with the Israeli delegation, the wind howling, looking at the stones. He doesn't say, "You guys are being stubborn." He doesn't threaten to pull U.S. funding. He doesn't offer a new treaty outline.
He just lets them look at the ruins of their ancestors.
This raises a fascinating question about communication. How do you issue a dire warning without saying a single word?
By relying on the symbol. The Israelis instantly understood the unspoken message. Kissinger was indirectly accusing them of courting mass suicide through their stubbornness at the negotiating table.
That is heavy.
It is. He was using their own sacred, tragic history to say, if you do not compromise with your neighbors, you are going to destroy yourselves all over again, just like you did on this mountain.
Symbols like a flag, a mythic story, or a monument like Masada carry massive emotional significance. They act as a psychological shortcut past the rational brain's defensive perimeter.
If Kissinger had sat at the conference table and verbally accused the Israeli delegation of being suicidal, they would have been deeply offended. Their egos would have engaged.
They would have argued about military readiness, tactical advantages, and historical rights.
But by simply visiting the ruins, he planted a seed of existential dread. The beauty of an unspoken threat is that it forces the target's own brain to connect the dots. When the target's brain does the work, they own the conclusion. It bypasses the friction of debate entirely.
The symbol does all the heavy lifting. Okay, so we've looked at surviving an execution, preserving an ego, and issuing unspoken threats. But what if the goal isn't just to issue a warning?
What do you mean?
What if you have to entirely reconstruct how a large group of people views reality, or even how they view themselves? How do you manufacture a new social reality without issuing a harsh decree?
You use metaphorical action. You create a physical narrative that they unwittingly participate in, allowing them to arrive at the new reality on their own terms.
Let's look at a story recorded by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. It's the story of Amasis, the Egyptian king, from the 5th century BC. Amasis manages a successful rebellion, deposes the previous ruler, Apries, and takes the throne. But he faces a massive crisis of legitimacy.
The Egyptians absolutely despise him.
The psychology of the masses is deeply tied to symbols of authority. Why the hatred?
Because Amasis comes from a very humble, undistinguished origin in a dusty provincial town called Sif. He's a commoner. The Egyptians are inclined to be contemptuous of him. They don't think he has the divine right, the royal pedigree, or the bloodline to rule them. They view him as a usurper.
It's a fundamental problem of social constructs.
Yeah.
They believe a king must be born, not made.
Exactly.
So Amasis has a choice. How do you govern people who think you are trash? He could violently oppress them, pass strict laws banning dissent, or travel the country giving grand speeches about his military capabilities.
But he doesn't do any of that.
No. He cleverly decides he needs to bring them to heel without having recourse to harsh measures because fear breeds rebellion. Amasis has this particular item among his newly acquired royal treasures, a massive, solid gold footbath.
Okay, a foot bath.
It's a basin that he and his guests use to wash their feet. And frankly, because of the nature of ancient banquets, they also use it to piss and vomit in after long nights of drinking.
It is the lowest, most degraded, unhygienic item in the palace, despite being made of a precious metal. It is functionally a toilet.
Amasis takes this filthy footbath, summons his artisans, has it broken into pieces, and melts the gold down. He uses that exact same gold to cast a magnificent detailed statue of one of the chief Egyptian gods.
Oh, wow.
He then takes this newly minted, gleaming idol and sets it up in the most prominent central intersection in the city.
And how do the citizens react to this new idol?
The Egyptians, constantly walking past this beautiful new statue in the sunlight, start treating it with profound religious reverence. They bow to it, they bring it offerings, they pray to it, they worship it.
And Amasis is just watching this happen.
As soon as Amasis hears about the effect the statue is having, he calls a massive public meeting in the square.
The great reveal.
He stands before the massive crowd and points to the statue. He reveals the secret of its creation. He tells them that this deeply revered statue, the one they are currently bowing to, used to be the palace footbath.
He spares no details.
He tells them the thing they washed their feet in, the thing that was pissed and vomited in, he is now their god. Then he drops the metaphor. He tells them that his own case is much the same.
A brilliant parallel.
Once, he was just an ordinary, humble person from Saif, and now he is their king. He says, just as you have come to revere the transformed footbath, so you had better pay honor and respect to me too.
It is an incredible manipulation of semiotics, the study of signs and symbols. He showed them that their own biases were completely arbitrary.
It's like taking the cheapest, dirtiest raw material, slapping a luxury designer logo on it, and watching people line up around the block to buy it, just to prove a point about human perception.
Exactly.
He didn't argue that he was fit to be king. He proved to them that their definition of what is sacred is completely malleable.
He let them fall into the trap of their own reverence first. He manufactured their consent by showing them the absurdity of their prejudice.
It's so clever.
Let's connect this to another deeply metaphorical story from the source text, drawn from 13th century Arabic wisdom literature. It's a parable about God and the prophet Abraham.
Oh, this one is brilliant and a little heartbreaking. So the story goes that the Most High God had made a specific promise to Abraham. He would not take Abraham's soul unless Abraham explicitly wanted to die and asked him to do so.
A divine loophole, essentially honoring Abraham's extraordinary devotion.
Right, but time passes. Abraham's life is drawing to a close, and God determines it is finally time to seize him. But he is bound by his word. He has to get Abraham to ask for death.
That's a tricky situation.
So God sends an angel to Abraham's door. But the angel is disguised as a decrepit, incredibly old man who is almost entirely incapacitated by age. The frail old man knocks on the door and says, "Oh, Abraham, I would like something to eat."
Now, Abraham is famously hospitable in the lore. His tent was always open to passing guests. But even he is shocked by the man's physical deterioration.
Abraham looks at him and he's so disturbed he blurts out, "Die. It would be better for you than to go on living in that condition." But true to his nature, he brings the man inside, sits him down, and prepares a bowl of broth, meat, and breadcrumbs.
And the old man sits down to eat.
But it is a laborious, agonizing process. He is swallowing with great effort. His hands are trembling violently. Food is dropping from his shaking fingers, scattering all over the floor.
It is a stark, unvarnished portrait of the extreme indignity of old age, the loss of bodily autonomy.
The old man gasps and says, "Help me to eat." So Abraham actually takes the food in his own hand and tries to lift it gently to the old man's lips. But the man is shaking so badly and his mouth is so slack that the broth and meat just slide down his chin, into his beard, and all over his chest.
It's utterly pathetic.
Finally, a terrified Abraham asks, "What is your age, old man?" The old man croaks out a number, and that number is only slightly older than Abraham's own current age.
The mirror is held up.
Instantly, Abraham realizes what his own immediate future looks like. He sees the physical humiliation awaiting him in just a few short years. He throws his hands up and exclaims, "O Lord our God, take me unto you before I reach this man's age and sink into the same condition as he is in now."
He asked for it.
And no sooner had he spoken those words than God took possession of his soul.
If we look at the underlying mechanics of both Amasis and God in these stories, they share a common thread. Both the king and the creator had a specific goal they needed to achieve, but they both wanted to avoid harsh measures or forceful arguments.
Amasis didn't want to execute his citizens, and God didn't want to break his promise.
Exactly. They both created a physical, sensory situation where the target gently arrived at the desired conclusion completely on their own.
They let the target convince themselves.
The source text has this wonderful imagery for this concept. It compares argument to a playground seesaw. Up and down go the arguers.
You push with a fact, I push back with a counterfact.
We get nowhere fast. We just suspend each other in a state of perpetual tension and elevated heart rates. The text advises, get off the seesaw. Show them your meaning without kicking or pushing. Leave them at the top of the seesaw and let gravity bring them gently to the ground.
Abraham was brought gently to the ground of his own mortality.
The Egyptians were brought gently to the ground of their own hypocrisy. Gravity does the work. You don't have to push.
Okay, I have to pause here. We've spent this entire deep dive painting a very specific, almost absolute picture of communication. The lesson seems to be, never ever argue. Silence and action are the only way. We act, we build dummy columns, we visit ancient ruins, we melt down footbaths. Is this a universal law? Do we just take a vow of professional silence?
Not exactly.
The exception to the rule.
There is a reversal to this law. In the study of power, every law has a shadow side. There is one highly specific, highly dangerous, but incredibly effective time when you absolutely must argue.
Let's get into it. We are looking at a man named Count Victor Lustig.
One of the most legendary, audacious swindlers and con artists in American history. This is a man who famously sold the Eiffel Tower twice.
Swindler par excellence. But for this story, we are focusing on one of Lustig's more common but brilliant scams. He sold a device called the phony money copying box to dozens of wealthy suckers around the country.
It was a beautiful mahogany box with brass dials and levers.
He claimed this magical wooden box used radium to perfectly duplicate $100 bills overnight. He'd demonstrate it, using a sleight of hand to produce a real bill he had hidden inside, take their $10,000 purchase price, and vanish.
Usually when the suckers spent all night cranking the dials and figured out the box was empty and they'd been had, they were too embarrassed to go to the police.
They didn't want the public humiliation of admitting they believed a magic box printed money.
The con relies heavily on the victim's own shame to prevent pursuit, but he eventually conned the wrong man.
He conned Sheriff Richards of Remsen County, Oklahoma. And Sheriff Richards was not the kind of man to accept being conned out of 10 grand. The sheriff tracks Lustig's movements for weeks, following his trail all the way from Oklahoma to a luxury hotel room in Chicago.
The ultimate confrontation. The predator becomes the prey. This brings us back to our opening scenario.
Lustig is sitting in his room. He hears a sharp knock on his hotel door. He opens it, and he is staring straight down the barrel of the sheriff's service revolver. The sheriff is sweating. His finger is on the trigger, and he's screaming, "You son of a bitch, I'm gonna kill you. You conned me with that damn box."
Now, according to everything we've discussed today about preserving egos and avoiding debate, Lustig should just perform an action. He should slowly raise his hands, silently walk to his suitcase, and hand the money back to de-escalate the physical threat.
But Lustig has incredible sociopathic nerve. He doesn't submit. He feigns total innocent confusion. He looks at the gun, looks at the sheriff's angry face, and says calmly, "What seems to be the problem?" "You mean it's not working?"
The sheer audacity.
The sheriff yells, "You know it's not working, you con man." And Lustig argues back. He raises his voice and says, "But that's impossible. There's no way it couldn't be working. Did you operate it properly?"
He actively initiates an argument with a man holding a loaded gun aimed at his chest.
He puts the blame on the sheriff. "I did exactly what you told me to do," the sheriff says, the gun still raised. Lustig shakes his head stubbornly. "No, you must have done something wrong. Did you turn the primary dial clockwise or counterclockwise?"
He's pulling him into the weeds.
And they start arguing. They argue in circles about levers and radium alignment and the crank speed. And as they argue, as the sheriff tries to defend his intelligence and prove he followed the instructions, he gets drawn into the technicalities and his arm gets tired. The barrel of the gun is gently lowered.
The physical threat recedes as the mental bandwidth is completely hijacked.
Once the gun is pointing at the floor, Lustig goes to phase 2 of the argument. He pours out a whole bunch of rapid-fire technical gobbledygook about the box's internal operation. He completely beguiles the sheriff, who now starts to feel a little insecure.
The cognitive load is too heavy.
The sheriff starts thinking, maybe I did operate it wrong. It was a complicated box. He argues less forcefully. Finally, Lustig sighs acting like the aggrieved party, and says, look, I'll give you your money back right now to make this right. I'll give you written instructions, and I'll even come out to Oklahoma next week to make sure it's working properly.
The sheriff, exhausted by the debate, reluctantly agrees.
But Lustig knows human nature. He knows the sheriff is still angry and might reconsider once he leaves the room. He needs to completely neutralize him.
So to satisfy him totally, Lustig opens his trunk. He takes out a stack of crisp $100 bills.
He gives the sheriff his initial $10,000 back, and then he counts out an extra $10,000 in hundreds and hands it over. He tells the sheriff to relax, take the extra cash for his trouble, and go have a fun, lavish weekend in Chicago on him.
The sheriff, totally confused, his adrenaline depleted but suddenly feeling very rich, calms down, puts his gun away, and leaves the hotel.
And the ultimate punchline of the scam. Over the next few days, Lustig safely leaves Chicago, but he checks the local newspaper every morning. Finally, he finds the short police blotter article he's looking for.
What did it say?
Sheriff Richards of Oklahoma was arrested, tried, and convicted in Chicago for passing counterfeit notes. The extra $10,000 Lustig gave him to go have fun with was totally fake.
Unbelievable.
Lustig won the argument, got the sheriff out of the room, and ensured the man would be locked up in a Chicago jail and never bother him again.
Let's unpack the psychology of this reversal, because it is crucial to understanding the full spectrum of human interaction. Verbal argument has one vital, highly specific use in the realm of power: distraction and deception.
When you are caught in a lie, or when you are actively practicing deception, arguing with intense emotion and feigned conviction is your best camouflage.
It's a cognitive smoke grenade.
That is the perfect analogy. When you are caught, the more emotional and certain you appear in your argument, the less likely it seems to the target that you are lying.
Human beings naturally assume that liars, when confronted, will cower, deflect, or run. When Lustig leaned in and indignantly demanded, "Did you operate it properly?" he purposefully dragged the sheriff onto that seesaw of argument we talked about.
But he didn't do it to convince the sheriff the box worked. He did it to blind him.
Exactly. By forcing the sheriff's brain to process complex, defensive thoughts about dials and levers, he ensured the sheriff had no mental bandwidth left to critically examine the counterfeit bills he was about to be handed.
Lustig won the argument precisely because he understood that in that moment, words were just noise. He didn't care about proving his point. He cared about lowering the gun and exhausting the mark. He weaponized the absolute uselessness of words.
It's a masterful, albeit deeply cynical, application of the exact same psychology that got the Roman engineer killed. The engineer argued to prove a point. Lustig argued to create a distraction.
It is a dark art, and it brings us full circle on our journey today. We started with the tragic arrogance of the military engineer in Athens, a man who believed that possessing the scientific truth shielded him from the wrath of a Roman consul.
He died because he didn't understand that arguing with the superior impugns their ego and triggers a biological threat response.
We saw the brilliant, visceral survival tactics of the condemned vizier, who didn't waste time arguing his innocence against slander. Instead, he used the Sultan's own hunting dogs to mirror the Sultan's cruelty, bypassing logic entirely to deliver undeniable emotional proof.
We looked at the subtle art of the illusion, Michelangelo dropping a handful of marble dust to appease a patron, and Sir Christopher Wren building dummy columns that held up nothing but a mayor's fragile psyche.
Proving that you can preserve your own integrity and the other person's ego at the exact same time.
We witnessed the terrifying power of symbols. We felt the drop in temperature with Khrushchev's silent, paralyzing auditorium, and we explored Kissinger's visit to the traumatic ruins of Masada, demonstrating how to induce visceral fear and force reflection without uttering a single threat.
We saw how leaders like Amasis, the Egyptian king and the god of Abraham, used physical metaphors to gently bring people to new realities, bypassing the seesaw of debate to let gravity do the work.
And finally, we looked at the sociopathic brilliance of Count Victor Lustig, who used the empty, confusing noise of argument as a smoke grenade to literally talk his way out of a loaded gun.
The core lesson here for you, the learner, is about energy conservation and strategic empathy. Choose your battles carefully. If time and the other person's own lived experience will eventually make them understand what you meant, then save your energy. Walk away. Don't even bother with the demonstration.
Let them figure it out. As the 19th century British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli advised regarding the halls of power, in society, nothing must be discussed. Give only results.
And that leaves us with a highly relevant, provocative thought to mull over as we conclude. We live in an era that is the absolute antithesis of everything we just discussed.
We live in an era of endless, frictionless digital argument.
The comment sections, the social media threads, the endless reply-all email chains at work. We are increasingly stripped of our physical bodies in communication, forced to exist only as text on a screen.
If words are truly a dime a dozen, and if the truth is generally seen, rarely heard, how do we effectively demonstrate our actions in a digital world?
When you only have text, how do you create a dummy column or a marble dust moment in your next contentious email thread without triggering the ego of the person on the other side of the screen?
That is the real challenge for the modern era. How to act when you can only type.
Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive. We invite you to keep exploring, keep questioning the dynamics of the conversations around you, and perhaps tomorrow, try winning your next disagreement without saying a single word. Step back, let the seesaw drop, and see what happens when you let gravity do the work. Until next time.